The late afternoon sun bled through the pine trees surrounding the Blackfoot Reservation's training arena, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Chief Thomas Blackfeather stood center ring, arms raised like a medicine man at prayer. His ceremonial beads caught the light, and the lines on his weathered face seemed deeper under the weight of what he was about to offer. Next to him, a massive German shepherd, midnight black with a slash of white across his chest, paced violently, yellow eyes wild with mistrust. The air grew tight, silent. Shadow was his name. A beast too dangerous for handlers, too wild for any trainer. A walking legend of bitten arms and ruined careers. "This animal served our country," Thomas announced, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. "I ain't charging a cent, but I'll lay down a challenge. 5 minutes with him following your command, and Shadow is yours. But don't fool yourselves. This ain't just a dog. He's a storm wrapped in fur." The audience shifted uneasily. Whispers, nervous laughter. They'd seen what Shadow did last spring. 3 handlers hospitalized, 1 with severed tendons. Then the silence cracked, soft but sharp. From the crowd a young woman stepped forward. Her combat boots stirred the dust. She wore faded military fatigues, her black hair pulled tight beneath a red bandana. Her name wasn't known to anyone present, but the moment her eyes met Shadow's, the mood shifted. There was stillness, like the calm before lightning strikes earth. Feel alike, and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The Blackfoot Reservation sprawled across the Montana foothills like a forgotten quilt, patches of pine forest stitched together with meadows and streams. Once vast, now reduced to 30,000 acres of pride and poverty. At its heart stood the Eagle Wing Training Center, where for generations the Blackfoot had raised and trained working dogs for police, rescue, and military use. What had begun as survival had become tradition, then industry, then struggle as funding dwindled. Chief Thomas Blackfeather had led both tribe and center for 20 years. His authority as unquestioned as the mountains themselves. At 60, his face held the geography of his ancestors. High cheekbones, hawk-like nose, deep-set eyes that missed nothing. Thomas had served 2 tours in Vietnam before returning to the reservation, bringing military discipline to traditional ways. His silver hair, always braided, hung to the middle of his back, moving like a pendulum when he walked among the kennels each morning. Few remembered the younger Thomas, the one who had once fallen desperately in love with a white emergency medic after she pulled him from a mountain crevasse during a blizzard. Fewer still knew about Sarah Rainwater, or the child she had carried alone when Thomas chose tribe over heart. The woman who now stood facing Shadow was that child, Ayanna Rainwater, 23. With her father's black hair and her mother's green eyes, she carried herself with military precision. 3 years in Afghanistan had left her with a purple heart, a medical discharge, and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. The scar along her jawline was still pink, newer than the ones she carried inside. She had come, not just to confront the father who abandoned her, but to reclaim the one soul who understood her darkness, the dog that had once been her partner in war. Joseph Blackfeather watched from the edge of the ring, his brother's shadow in more ways than one. Where Thomas held to tradition, Joseph had embraced progress, always pushing for development, for deals with outside interests. At 55, his ambition had not dimmed, merely simmered, waiting. To him, Ayanna wasn't just an unwelcome niece. She was a threat to everything he had patiently waited to inherit. Shadow recognized something in the woman. His ears twitched forward, his posture shifting from aggression to alertness. Everyone saw it. No one understood it. The crowd held its collective breath as Ayanna stepped into the ring. Her movements were deliberate, measured, the walk of someone who calculated risk with every step. Shadow's ears remained forward, his body still but attentive, like a loaded weapon waiting for the trigger to be pulled. Chief Thomas Blackfeather's hand instinctively moved to the whistle around his neck, ready to call off his demonstration if the dog lunged. "Miss, this isn't wise," Thomas warned, his gravelly voice carrying across the sudden silence. "This animal has PTSD worse than most veterans I know. He doesn't respond to strangers." Ayanna didn't look at Thomas. Her gaze remained locked on Shadow, unwavering. "He's not a stranger to me, Chief Blackfeather," she responded, loud enough for the first rows to hear. The way she emphasized his name carried weight beyond respect. It held accusation. Thomas narrowed his eyes, studying the young woman more carefully now. Something in her features tugged at his memory. The slope of her cheekbones, the set of her jaw. But he pushed the thought away. This was about the demonstration, about proving no one could handle Shadow except him. "Your name, miss?" he asked, more ceremonial than curious. "Sergeant Ayanna Rainwater, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired." She still hadn't broken her gaze with Shadow. "And this is Sergeant Shadow, military working dog, identification number K435. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Thomas felt his mouth go dry, his hand dropping from the whistle. The name Rainwater hit him like a physical blow. Around the arena, elders exchanged glances, and Joseph Blackfeather pushed away from the fence, suddenly alert to potential trouble. "That's impossible," Thomas finally managed. "This dog came from Bagram Air Base," Ayanna finished. "3rd Battalion, my unit." She finally turned to face Thomas directly. "You knew exactly who he was when you bought him. Just like you knew exactly who I was when my mother wrote to tell you she was pregnant 23 years ago." The crowd's murmur became a buzz of whispers and questions. Thomas Blackfeather, respected chief and elder, stood motionless, his carefully constructed world tilting beneath him. Joseph moved toward the center ring, his presence spreading like oil on water. "This is inappropriate," Joseph announced sharply. "We're here for a demonstration, not personal matters." Ayala ignored him, taking another step toward Shadow. The dog's tail moved once, not a wag, but an acknowledgement. When she extended her hand, palm down, in the universal military signal for hold, Shadow's posture changed instantly. He sat, alert but calm, as if a switch had been flipped. "Kia," she whispered, the Blackfoot word for wait. Something her mother had taught her as a child, a fragment of the heritage she'd been denied. Shadow didn't move. The crowd grew silent again, witnessing something they couldn't quite comprehend. The dangerous, unpredictable animal was now sitting perfectly still, focused entirely on this stranger, who was somehow not a stranger at all. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Only someone who had worked extensively with Shadow would know his commands. Only someone from his military past would know how to approach him. In the name Rainwater, there was only one possibility, one truth he'd spent 23 years avoiding. "Clear the arena," he ordered suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Everyone except Miss Rainwater." "Thomas," Joseph began, his tongue warning. "Now, Joseph." It wasn't a request. It was a chief giving an order. People began to exit, slowly, reluctantly, sensing they were witnessing something momentous but private. Joseph remained, arms crossed, his expression thunderous with disapproval and calculation. When the last spectator had cleared the training ring, Thomas faced Ayanna directly. "You have 3 minutes to explain why you're here before I have you escorted off tribal land." Ayanna's laugh was cold, brittle. "That's rich coming from you. 23 years of silence, and now you're giving me 3 minutes." "I'm not here for you, Chief. I'm here for him," she nodded toward Shadow. "My partner, my dog. This animal is tribal property, Purchased legally, Thomas countered, his voice carefully controlled despite the hurricane building inside him. Using what money? The money you never sent to my mother when she was working 3 jobs to raise your daughter? The words emerged like bullets, precise and targeted. Or maybe some of the money she spent on my college that should have gone to her cancer treatments? Thomas froze, his composure cracking visibly. Cancer? 6 months to live, they say. Maybe less. Hyena's voice softened just slightly. That's why I'm here. She wanted me to find you before she swallowed hard. She wanted closure. I just wanted my dog back. Shadow whined softly, sensing the emotional current between them. Joseph stepped forward, inserting himself physically between Thomas and Ayanna. This is a spectacle best handled privately, he hissed to his brother. The council will hear about this, Thomas. The tribal council meeting hall sat empty except for Thomas and Ayanna, their silhouettes sharp against the late afternoon light streaming through high windows. Shadow lay at Ayanna's feet, his eyes never leaving her face. The dog's loyalty was undeniable, a stark contrast to the fractured human relationship unfolding in the sacred space. I don't know what you want from me, Thomas finally said, breaking the tense silence. His voice had lost its public authority, revealing something raw underneath. If it's money, I don't want your money, Ayanna cut in. I never did, neither did my mother. Thomas paced the worn floorboards, his footsteps echoing. Then why come now, after all these years? I told you, Mom is dying. Ayanna's voice caught, just slightly. And Shadow recognized me on the television when they did that piece about wounded warriors last month. You saw it too, didn't you? That's why you suddenly acquired him and brought him here. Hausen stopped pacing. The accusation hung between them, impossible to deny without outright lying. When he'd seen the news segment featuring veterans with PTSD, he'd recognized her immediately. Sarah's eyes, his own stubborn jaw, his daughter in military fatigues, describing the ambush that had killed 3 of her teammates and left her and her military working dog with invisible wounds. He'd made calls the next day, pulling strings, paying triple what the Pentagon asked for the damn dog they could no longer use. I didn't know how to reach you, he admitted finally. You never tried. Ayanna's voice was flat, emotionless. 23 years, and you never once tried? Before Thomas could respond, the meeting hall door burst open. Joseph entered, followed by 2 tribal police officers and a stern-looking woman in her 70s. Hailing many horses, the eldest council member. This woman needs to be removed from tribal property, Joseph announced, his voice carrying an authority he hadn't earned. She's making unfounded claims and disrupting. She's my daughter, Joseph. Thomas's words fell like stones into still water. The room went silent. Helen Many Horses stepped forward, her ancient eyes moving from Thomas to Ayanna and back again. Sarah Rainwater's child? She asked softly. Thomas nodded once, unable to meet her gaze. Then she is Blackfather by blood, and no one will remove her from tribal land, Helen declared, her voice brooking no argument. She turned to Joseph, whose face had darkened with barely controlled rage. Leave us! Joseph hesitated, then stormed out, the tribal officers following uncertainly behind him. Helen approached Ayanna slowly, studying her face with the intensity of someone reading ancient text. You have your grandmother's spirit in your eyes, she said finally. Strong women, the black feather line, even when the men forget their way. She shot Thomas a withering look before turning back to Ayanna. Why have you come, daughter of Sarah? For him? Ayanna nodded toward Shadow, who had risen to stand protectively at her side. And because my mother is dying, she wanted... Ayanna's composure wavered. She wanted to make peace before she goes. Helen nodded slowly, then reached out and took Ayana's hand between her weathered palms. "There are many kinds of peace, child. Some we make with others, some we make with ourselves." She released Ayana's hand and turned to Thomas. "You have walked in shadows too long, nephew. The time for truth has come." With that pronouncement, Helen left them alone once more, the door closing softly behind her. Thomas moved to the window, staring out at the mountains that had cradled his people for generations. "Your mother saved my life," he said softly. "Did she ever tell you that?" "She told me everything," Ayana replied. "The blizzard, the mountain rescue, how you promised to build a life with her." A pause. "How the council threatened to remove you as future chief if you married outside the tribe." Thomas turned sharply. "That's not—" "She found the letters, Chief Blackfeather, the ones from your father warning you what would happen if you chose her." As yet, Thomas closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of decades of silence. When he opened them again, he looked older, more vulnerable. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I convinced myself I was protecting the tribe, honoring my father's wishes, but I was just afraid." Ayana didn't respond immediately. Shadow whined softly, pressing against her leg as if sensing her distress. She absently stroked the dog's head, finding comfort in the familiar texture of his fur. Its exercise can be a deal transforming to introduce a new peal of excitement to people in their day. But now, I thought about her and about us every day, Thomas answered, the words barely audible. "I thought about you both every single day." A commotion outside broke the moment. Raised voices, the slam of a truck door. Thomas moved quickly to the window. "Joseph," he muttered. "He's gathering people." Ayana stood, instantly alert, military training evident in her posture. "What's happening?" "Politics," Thomas said grimly. "My brother has wanted my position for decades. He's using this situation, to finally make his move." Through the window they could see Joseph gesturing forcefully, surrounded by a growing crowd of tribal members. His voice carried faintly. "Harboring outsiders, keeping secrets, unfit to lead." Thomas turned to Ayana, decision hardening his features. "I can't give you back 23 years. I can't undo what I did to your mother. But I can protect you now." He moved toward the door, then paused. "That dog, Shadow, he was more than your partner, wasn't he?" Ayana's face softened, looking at the German shepherd. "He saved my life in Kandahar, pulled me behind cover when the ambush hit, lost part of his ear doing it." She touched the scar along her jaw. "We came home with the same wounds, just different kinds." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding flowing between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. "Stay here," he said. "I need to address the tribe." As he opened the door to face the gathering storm outside, Shadow moved to stand between Ayana and the potential threat. Loyal, protective, unwavering in his devotion. Everything Thomas had failed to be. The days following Ayana's confrontation with Thomas settled into an uneasy routine. While Joseph continued to stir discontent among some tribal members, Thomas had effectively silenced the immediate crisis by acknowledging Ayana as his blood. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, not yet, but it was enough to establish her right to remain on reservation land. Ayana took a small cabin near the training center, her sparse belongings barely filling the modest space. Shadow never left her side, his presence a constant reminder of the bond they'd forged in war and carried home in peace. Each morning they walked the perimeter of the property together, the air crisp with pine and possibility. Thomas watched from a distance, uncertain how to bridge the chasm of years. He noted how she moved, the military precision in her gait, the watchful assessment of her surroundings, and saw echoes of himself, painful reminders of shared blood and separate lives. By the third day, Ayanna began helping at the training center. Without formal invitation or announcement, she simply appeared at the kennels at dawn, Shadow at her heel, and began working with the problem cases, dogs too traumatized or aggressive for regular handlers. "She has a gift," Ben Runningwolf, the center's senior trainer, told Thomas, as they observed Ayanna calming a particularly anxious Belgian Malinois. "Those dogs respond to her like she speaks their language." Thomas nodded, a complicated pride swelling in his chest. "Her grandmother was the same way," he said quietly. "My mother could gentle any animal that walked or crawled." Ben glanced sideways at his chief. "Blood tells, even when we try to deny it." The comment stung, as Ben had surely intended. Thomas walked away without responding, retreating to his office where paperwork offered a convenient escape from uncomfortable truths. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to Ayanna. Thomas recognized the handwriting immediately, Sarah's delicate script, unchanged after all these years. His heart contracted painfully at the sight. He sent a young staff member to deliver it to Ayanna's cabin, then returned to staring blankly at budget reports that couldn't possibly matter less than the ghosts crowding his office. Across the reservation, Ayanna sat on her cabin porch, Sarah's letter open in her trembling hands. Medical updates, mostly, none of them good. The cancer had spread faster than expected. The doctors were adjusting their timeline. A clinical way of saying her mother was dying more quickly than predicted. Shadow whined softly, resting his muzzle on Ayanna's knee. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her shirt pocket, and buried her face in the dog's thick fur. "We should be there," she whispered, "but she made me promise to finish this first." The sound of approaching footsteps brought her head up sharply. Joseph Blackfeather stood at the edge of her property, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "My niece," he said, the acknowledgment lacking any familial warmth. "I thought we should speak privately." Shadow growled low in his throat, sensing Ayanna's instant tension. She laid a restraining hand on the dog's neck. "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss," she replied evenly. Joseph stepped closer, stopping when Shadow's growl intensified. "Thomas may have acknowledged your bloodline, but that doesn't make you Blackfoot. It doesn't make you one of us. I never claimed it. Then why are you here? What do you want from us?" Joseph's voice remained controlled, but anger simmered beneath the surface. Ayanna stood, Shadow rising with her. "I want what was taken from me, a father, a heritage, the truth." "The truth," Joseph repeated, a bitter smile twisting his features. "The truth is that Thomas made a choice, the tribe over a white woman. It was the right choice then, and it remains the right choice now. Is that why you're here, to defend my father's abandonment?" Joseph's laugh was cold. "I'm here to offer you a solution that benefits us both. The tribal council controls a discretionary fund. I can arrange for a substantial payment. Enough to care for your mother's medical needs, enough to start fresh somewhere else." Ayanna's eyes narrowed. "You're trying to buy me off." "I am offering you something more valuable than Thomas's belated guilt. I'm offering you a chance to help Sarah while there's still time." The mention of her mother's name from Joseph's lips sent a chill through Ayanna. "Don't speak about her," she warned, her voice dropping dangerously. "You have no right." Joseph shrugged, unperturbed. "Consider my offer. When Thomas steps down, and he will, sooner rather than later, things will change here. The old ways are dying. Progress is coming. Those who stand in its path will be forgotten." He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and if you're curious about where your father was during your childhood, you might ask him about the monthly payments sent to a certain bank account in Missoula. 15 years of reliable deposits until they suddenly stopped 3 years ago. His smile was venomous. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? Right around when you enlisted. Joseph walked away, leaving Ayanna staring after him, her world tilting off its axis once again. The next morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds pressing down on the mountains. Thomas arrived at the training center earlier than usual, driven by restlessness and unresolved questions. He found Ayanna already there, working with a young German Shepherd puppy in the indoor arena. He watched silently from the doorway, struck by how naturally she handled the animal. Shadow lay nearby, attentive but relaxed, occasionally offering a calming presence when the puppy became too excited. "You're good with them," Thomas said finally, announcing his presence. "Better than most trainers I've seen." Ayanna didn't look up. "Mom couldn't afford a dog when I was young. I used to volunteer at shelters just to be around them." Thomas moved closer, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Your mother, how is she?" Now Ayanna did look at him, her expression guarded. "Dying more quickly than the doctors expected." The bluntness of her reply hit Thomas like a physical blow. He had prepared himself for many versions of this conversation, but the stark reality of Sarah's imminent death left him momentarily speechless. "I should be with her," Ayanna continued, turning back to the puppy. "She made me promise to stay until I found answers, until I found Shadow." She glanced up again, her eyes accusing. "Joseph says you've been sending her money for 15 years. Is that true?" Thomas exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of secrets long kept. "Yes, because it was the least I could do. Because I couldn't face her, but I couldn't abandon her completely either." "But you could abandon me," Ayanna said flatly. Thomas flinched. "It wasn't that simple. It seems pretty simple from where I'm standing. You chose your tribe over your family, monthly payments to ease your conscience." "I chose wrong," Thomas admitted, the words like stones in his throat. "I've spent 23 years knowing I chose wrong." Ayanna gathered the puppy into her arms, its small body wriggling with excitement. "Then why did the payments stop?" 3 years ago, right when I enlisted, Joseph made sure to mention that timing. Thomas's expression darkened. "Joseph needs to mind his own business." "Answer the question." Thomas moved to a nearby bench and sat heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "The payments stopped because Sarah asked me to stop. She called me for the first time in decades, told me you had enlisted, that you were following in my footsteps without even knowing it." His voice grew rough with emotion. "She said she wouldn't take my money anymore. Said it was time I faced what I'd done." Ayanna regarded him silently, weighing his words. "I tried to find you then," Thomas continued, "called in favors with military contacts, but you were already deployed. Then I lost track, until I saw that television segment and bought Shadow." Thomas nodded. I thought he might bring you here eventually. I thought it might be a way to finally face you." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she held out the puppy to Thomas. "Here, he needs to get used to different handlers." Thomas hesitated, then carefully took the squirming animal. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, the first physical contact between father and daughter in 23 years. Neither acknowledged it, but both felt the jolt of connection. "What was she like?" Ayanna asked suddenly. "When you knew her, before me?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He looked down at the puppy, now contentedly settling in his lap. She was fearless, smart, stubborn as hell. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She pulled me out of a crevasse during the worst blizzard in 20 years. Broke protocol, risked her own life. When I asked her why, she said she'd never learned to follow stupid rules. Ayanna's expression softened slightly. That sounds like her. She loved thunderstorms, Thomas continued, memories spilling out now. Used to drag me outside to watch them roll in over the mountains. Said it was the earth and sky arguing, and we were privileged to witness it. He stroked the puppy absently. She had the most amazing laugh, like music. She doesn't laugh much anymore, Ayanna said quietly. The simple statement hung between them, heavy with all it implied. Before Thomas could respond, Ben Running Wolf burst into the arena, his expression urgent. "Chief, we have a situation. Joseph's called an emergency council meeting. He's pushing for a vote of no confidence." Thomas handed the puppy back to Ayanna and stood. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming financial irregularities. Says you've been diverting tribal funds for personal use." Ben glanced uncomfortably at Ayanna. "He's using the payments to Sarah Rainwater as evidence." Face hardened. "Those were my personal funds, not tribal money." "Maybe so, but he's got council members questioning everything now. And he's brought in outside developers again. The same ones who wanted to build that resort casino last year. They're offering triple what we rejected then." Thomas turned to Ayanna, conflict evident in his features. "I have to deal with this." She nodded shortly. "Go. This isn't my fight." But as Tama hurried away with Ben, Ayanna found herself wondering if that was truly the case. The training center had become a refuge in the short time she'd been there, a place where her skills mattered, where she could work through her own trauma while helping damaged animals heal. If Joseph succeeded in ousting Tamas and selling reservation land to developers, what would happen to the center? To the dogs? To Shatter? The thought of losing this newfound sanctuary sent a wave of unexpected panic through her. She placed the puppy back in its enclosure and whistled for Shadow. "Come on, boy. I think we need to learn more about tribal politics." Later that afternoon, Ayanna stood at the back of the packed council meeting, Shadow pressed against her leg. The atmosphere was tense, voices raised in passionate argument. Joseph stood at the center, his presentation slick and rehearsed. "The training center loses money every year," he was saying, gesturing to projected figures on a screen. "The resort developers are offering us a chance to turn a financial drain into a major source of revenue. Jobs for our people. Education funds for our children. At what cost?" Helen Many Horses challenged from her seat at the council table. "Our heritage is not for sale, Joseph Blackfeather." "Our heritage won't feed hungry families," Joseph countered smoothly. "And can we trust the current leadership to make these decisions? Thomas has demonstrated questionable judgment, using tribal position to hide personal indiscretions, sending reservation money off reservation for decades." Thomas stood, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Those payments came from my personal accounts, not tribal funds. I have the bank records to prove it." "Convenient records that suddenly appear when questioned," Joseph retorted. "And what about the military dog? Purchased with whose authority? Whose money?" Before Thomas could respond, Ayanna stepped forward, her military bearing commanding instant attention. Shadow moved with her, his presence adding weight to her advance. "If I may address the council," she said, her voice clear and steady. Helen nodded permission, ignoring Joseph's scowl of disapproval. "My name is Sergeant Ayanna Rainwater. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan. 3 years ago, my unit was ambushed. 3 of my team members died. Shadow and I survived because of each other." She placed her hand on the dog's head. "When I was evacuated with injuries, Shadow was reassigned. He became aggressive, unmanageable. Military handlers couldn't work with him because his trauma was too severe." She paused, making eye contact with various council members. "Chief Blackfeather didn't purchase Shadow with tribal funds. He used his own savings, money he'd set aside for his retirement. I know this because I obtained the purchase records from the Pentagon before coming here." A surprised murmur ran through the room. Thomas looked equally startled. "As for why he bought Shadow," Ayanna continued, "you'll have to ask him. But I can tell you this, that dog has saved more lives than most people in this room. He deserves respect, not to be used as a political weapon." She reached into her pocket and removed a folded paper, holding it up. "This is a letter from the Department of Defense, confirming that Shadow was purchased privately by Thomas Blackfeather for the purpose of rehabilitation. There was no tribal involvement." Joseph's face darkened with anger. "This doesn't change the financial reality of the training center. It doesn't address the leadership questions." "No," Ayanna agreed calmly. "But it does address the question of integrity. And before this council votes on anything, I think they deserve all the facts, not just the ones that serve your agenda." The room erupted in voices, some supportive, others questioning. As Ayanna turned to leave, her eyes met Thomas's across the crowded space. In his gaze, she saw something unexpected. Pride. The council meeting had adjourned in disarray with no vote taken and tensions running high throughout the reservation. Thomas found Ayanna at the training center's back paddock, where she worked methodically with Shadow and 3 other dogs, running them through advanced obedience drills. She moved with quiet confidence, her commands barely above a whisper, yet each animal responded instantly. Thomas leaned against the fence, watching. In her movements, he saw echoes of his own training methods, techniques he'd developed over decades of working with difficult cases. But there was something else, too, something uniquely hers, a gentle persistence that came from understanding trauma from the inside out. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, breaking the silence between them. "Stand up for me in there." Ayanna didn't look up from the dogs. "I wasn't standing up for you. I was standing up for the truth. Either way, I'm grateful." Thomas hesitated. "Joseph has been pushing for that casino development for years. He believes modernization is the only way forward for the tribe. And you don't? I believe we need to find our own path, not just imitate what's destroyed other nations." Thomas moved closer, entering the paddock carefully. Shadow watched him, but remained at Ayanna's side. "The training center represents something important. Our traditional connection to animals, adapted for today's world. It might not be profitable in dollars, but there are other kinds of wealth." Ayanna signaled the dogs to stay, then turned to face Thomas directly. "Noble sentiments, but sentiment doesn't pay bills." "No, it doesn't." Thomas acknowledged the hit with a slight nod. "That's why I've been looking for alternatives. Government contracts for service dogs, training programs for veterans." He paused. "Your intervention at the council bought us time, but Joseph won't stop. He's convinced the old ways, my ways, are holding the tribe back." "And you thought bringing me here would somehow help your cause?" Ayanna's voice sharpened. "Was that the plan? Use the long-lost daughter to generate sympathy?" "No." Thomas's denial was immediate. "When I saw you on that television program, when I heard what happened to you and Shadow in Afghanistan, I wanted to help. That's all." He drew a deep breath. "I've spent 23 years trying to make up for my greatest mistake. Bringing Shadow here was just one more attempt." Before Ayanna could respond, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her pocket, glanced at the screen, and her expression changed instantly. "I need to take this," she said, moving away for privacy. Thomas watched her speaking urgently into the phone, her free hand clenched at her side. When she returned, her face was pale, her composure visibly shaken. "What is it?" he asked, concern overriding caution. "My mother's been hospitalized. Her condition is deteriorating faster than expected." Ayanna's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "I need to go to her now." Thomas nodded immediately. I'll drive you. The tribal clinic has a helicopter for emergencies. We can be in Missoula in 40 minutes. For a moment, Ayanna looked like she might refuse. Then she gave a terse nod. Shadow comes with me. I want to. As they hurried toward Thomas's truck, Joseph appeared, blocking their path. Going somewhere? He asked, his tone deceptively casual. Not now, Joseph, Thomas warned, moving to step around his brother. Joseph didn't budge. The council is reconvening tomorrow morning, early. Your absence would be noted. Sarah Rainwater is in the hospital, Thomas said bluntly. Critically ill. I'm taking Ayanna to her. Something flickered in Joseph's eyes, not sympathy, but calculation. How convenient. A family emergency just when tribal business becomes uncomfortable. His manner were steadily harming. Ayanna stepped forward, her patience visibly breaking. My mother is dying. Move, now. Shadow sensed her tension, his posture shifting subtly into protection mode. Joseph glanced at the dog and wisely stepped aside, but not before delivering a parting shot. The council won't wait forever, Thomas. Change is coming, whether you face it or run from it. His gaze shifted to Ayanna. Some patterns run in families, it seems. Thomas grabbed Ayanna's arm when she tensed, guiding her toward the truck. He's not worth it, he muttered. Your mother needs you. The helicopter flight to Missoula Memorial Hospital was tense and silent. Thomas sat across from Ayanna, watching her stroke Shadow's ears with mechanical regularity, the motion seeming to calm them both. The dog had been granted special clearance due to his service animal status, though the hospital administrator had sounded skeptical over the phone. She never stopped loving you, Ayanna said suddenly, her voice barely audible over the rotor noise. Even after everything, she kept your picture in her dresser drawer. Thomas felt his throat tighten. I never stopped loving her either, he admitted. I just wasn't brave enough to choose her over everything else. She knew that, I think. That's why it hurt so much. When they arrived at the hospital, Ayanna led the way with military efficiency, navigating the maze of corridors as if on a mission. Shadow stayed close, his training evident in how he moved through the crowded spaces without drawing attention. Thomas followed, feeling increasingly like an intruder in a story that had continued without him. Outside Sarah's room, Ayanna paused. Wait here, she instructed. I need to tell her you're here. Prepare her. Thomas nodded, his heart pounding uncomfortably. Through the partially open door, he caught a glimpse of monitors, tubes, the sterile equipment of modern medicine fighting a battle it couldn't win. Then Ayanna slipped inside, closing the door behind her. 5 minutes passed. 10. Thomas paced the hallway, ignoring curious glances from passing hospital staff. Shadow sat patiently by the door, his attention divided between the room containing Ayanna and the anxious man wearing a groove in the linoleum. Finally, the door opened. Ayanna's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. She wants to see you, she said simply. She's very weak. Don't expect much. Thomas entered the room slowly, years of rehearsed speeches evaporating at the sight of Sarah Rainwater. She lay propped against pillows, her once vibrant red hair now gray and thin, her skin almost translucent. IV lines snaked from her arms and an oxygen cannula looped beneath her nose. But her eyes, those remarkable green eyes that had captivated him from the first moment, were unchanged, still bright with intelligence and determination. Thomas, she said, her voice a whisper of its former strength. You came. He moved to her bedside, tentatively taking her outstretched hand. Her fingers felt like bird bones in his grip, fragile and precious. Sarah, he managed, her name catching in his throat. I'm so sorry. For everything. She shook her head slightly. No time for that now. Did you meet her? Our daughter? Yes. Thomas glanced at Ayanna, who stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed protectively over her chest. She's remarkable. like her mother. A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips, stubborn like her father. She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. I kept her from you too long. That was my mistake. Pride. You had every right. No, Sarah interrupted. We both made choices. Both let fear win. Her breathing became more labored, and Thomas instinctively reached to adjust her oxygen line. She caught his wrist. Still trying to save me, Thomas Blackfeather? Always, he whispered. Sarah's gaze shifted to Ayanna. The box, she said. In my closet, the blue one. Ayanna moved to a small closet, retrieving an old shoebox held closed with a faded ribbon. She placed it on the bed beside her mother. Open it, Sarah instructed. Both of you. Thomas looked to Ayanna, who nodded slightly. He untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of letters, some yellowed with age, others newer, all addressed to Ayanna in his handwriting. Letters he had sent to Sarah over the years, never knowing if she read them, never receiving reply. Beneath the letters lay a smaller bundle tied with string. Photographs. Thomas recognized them immediately. Pictures of Ayanna growing up. First steps, school plays, graduation. Moments of his daughter's life, carefully preserved. You kept them, he said, looking at Sarah in wonder. All this time. I read every letter, she confirmed. Never could bring myself to answer. But I couldn't throw them away either. Her eyes shifted to Ayanna. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I thought I was protecting you from more hurt. Ayanna stared at the box, her expression unreadable. All these years, I thought he never tried to contact us. He tried, Sarah said gently. In his way. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Ayanna picked up one of the photographs, herself at about 16, standing proudly beside Shadow as a puppy. She looked up sharply. This is how you knew about Shadow being my dog. You saw these pictures? Thomas nodded slowly. When I saw that news segment about wounded warriors, I recognized him from Sarah's photos. A soft chime from one of the monitors broke the moment. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed briefly, her energy visibly waning. You should rest, Thomas said, starting to rise. Sarah's grip on his hand tightened. No time for rest, she whispered. I need you both to listen. She looked from Thomas to Ayanna and back again. I'm not asking you to forget the past. Just don't let it poison your future. Your family, the only family either of you has left. She turned to Thomas, her gaze intense despite her failing strength. Promise me you'll try to know her, to be her father, even now. I promise, Thomas said immediately, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah's eyes shifted to Ayanna. And you. Promise me you'll give him a chance. Not for his sake, for yours. Ayanna hesitated, then nodded once. I'll try. Good. Sarah relaxed slightly, her breath coming in shorter gasps. Shadow? Take care of Shadow. He saved you. Now you save each other. As if summoned by his name, the German shepherd padded silently into the room, moving to Ayanna's side. He gently rested his muzzle on the bed near Sarah's hand. She smiled, using the last of her strength to stroke his head. Good boy, she whispered. Watch over him for me. The monitor's rhythm changed, its steady beat becoming more urgent. A nurse appeared in the doorway, quickly assessing the situation. She needs rest, she said firmly, moving toward the machines. Thomas stood, reluctantly releasing Sarah's hand. We'll come back tomorrow, he promised. Sarah's eyes were already closing, but she managed one last smile. Tomorrow, she agreed, though they all heard the unspoken truth. Tomorrow might not come. As they left the hospital, the setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. Thomas and Ayanna walked in silence, shadow between them, each lost in private thoughts. When they reached the helicopter, Thomas turned to Ayanna. "There's a hotel near the hospital. You should stay close." He hesitated. "I can have the pilot return for me later if you want the helicopter to go back to the reservation." Ayanna looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "There's no point in both of us staying tonight. She'll need us more tomorrow." A pause. "You should go back. Deal with the council. I know it's important." Thomas shook his head. "Not as important as this. Joseph can wait." "He won't wait. You know that." Ayanna's tone was practical, not accusing. "The center, the dogs, they need you, too." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She looked down at Shadow, who sat alertly between them. "We'll be fine. And if anything changes, call me immediately," Thomas finished. "I'll come back right away." As the helicopter lifted off, Thomas watched Ayanna and Shadow growing smaller below, an odd sensation of déjà vu washing over him. Once again he was leaving Sarah and his child behind. But this time he swore silently he would return. Nothing, not tribal politics, not his brother, not his own fears, would keep him from coming back. What he didn't see was Joseph Blackfeather's truck pulling into the hospital parking lot just as the helicopter disappeared over the mountains. Nor did he see his brother approach Ayanna, a thick envelope in his hand and determination in his step. The hospital room was eerily quiet in the pre-dawn hours, the machines monitoring Sarah's vital signs, providing a rhythmic counterpoint to her labored breathing. Ayanna sat beside the bed, her hand gently covering her mother's, while Shadow maintained his vigilant position at her feet. They had been there all night, Ayanna refusing to leave even when the nurses suggested she get some rest at the nearby hotel. "Came back for you," Sarah whispered suddenly, her eyes fluttering open. The words were so faint, Ayanna had to lean closer to hear them. "Thomas?" "Yes, he did." Ayanna squeezed her mother's hand gently. "He's dealing with some tribal business, but he'll be back today." Sarah shook her head slightly, the movement barely perceptible against the pillows. "Not Thomas. Shadow. He found his way back to you." Her gaze drifted to the German shepherd. "Always knew he would." Ayanna felt her throat tighten. "He never forgot me, even after 2 years apart. Bonds can't be broken." Sarah's eyes closed briefly, gathering strength. "Like ours." "Mom, you should rest." "No time for rest," Sarah interrupted, the familiar stubbornness briefly overriding her weakness. "The journal, in my bag. I want you to read it." Ayanna hesitated, then retrieved her mother's worn leather satchel from the closet. Inside, she found a handwritten journal, its pages yellowed and dog-eared from frequent handling. "This one?" Sarah nodded. "Start at the beginning, please." Ayanna opened the journal, recognizing her mother's elegant handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated 24 years earlier. "Read it aloud," Sarah requested. "I want to hear it in your voice." Ayanna drew a steadying breath and began. "October 15. The blizzard hit without warning. 3 climbers stranded on the north face. Standard rescue protocol abandoned due to conditions. T insisted on attempting the traverse despite visibility near zero. I've never seen someone move with such certainty in a whiteout. When the lead line snapped, he caught me before I even realized I was falling. Later, in the emergency shelter, he told me his grandfather taught him to feel the mountain rather than see it. He has the most remarkable eyes, dark as river stones, but somehow warm. I shouldn't be writing this. Professional boundaries. But I can't stop thinking about how his hand felt on my arm, steadying me when the world was chaos." Ayanna looked up from the page, meeting her mother's gaze. You never told me it was you who fell. I always thought he was the one who needed rescuing." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "Pride. I was the professional rescue worker. Couldn't admit I needed saving." She gestured weakly toward the journal. "Keep reading." Ayanna turned pages, scanning entries that documented the unfolding relationship between her parents, secret meetings along the reservation border, Sarah's growing understanding of Blackfoot traditions, Thomas's dreams of modernizing the tribe's approach to animal training. Their love story emerged in fragments, passionate and complicated. Then she reached an entry that made her pause. February 3, pregnant, 6 weeks, doctor confirms. Haven't told T yet. His father's health is deteriorating and the council is preparing to name him next in line for chief. The timing couldn't be worse. Joseph made a point of reminding everyone at last week's community meeting about the importance of pure Blackfoot leadership for future generations. The way he looked at me when he said it, he knows about us. Somehow, he knows. Ayanna's voice faltered. Joseph has been against us from the beginning. He saw me as a threat, Sarah confirmed, her breathing growing more labored, to tradition, to his own ambitions. Ayanna continued reading, her heart growing heavier with each entry. The journal chronicled her mother's increasing isolation as her pregnancy advanced, Thomas's gradual withdrawal as tribal pressures mounted, and finally, the devastating conversation where he asked for time that stretched into permanent absence. One particular entry made Ayanna stop, unable to continue reading aloud. April 30. Alone again tonight. The baby kicked so hard I laughed out loud, then found myself crying because there was no one to share the moment with. I've started talking to her. I'm convinced it's a girl, telling her stories about her father, not the painful truth, but the man I fell in love with, his gentleness with injured animals, his deep laugh that seems to come from the earth itself, his hands, always warm, even in the coldest weather. I want her to know these things, to know she comes from something beautiful, even if it broke. Tears blurred Ayanna's vision. She closed the journal, unable to continue. "Mom, Keep going," Sarah insisted. Near the end, Ayanna reluctantly opened the journal again, flipping to entries from just months earlier. She read in silence for a moment, then looked up sharply. "You knew about Shadow before I even told you?" Sarah nodded weakly. "Thomas called me when he found out what happened in Afghanistan. He was devastated. His likelihood he'd never tried to contact me directly. He didn't think he had the right." Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her daughter's. "The last 2 entries. Read them." Ayanna turned to the final pages of the journal. "9 me in. September 18. Oncologist confirmed what I already knew. 6 months, maybe less. Told Ayanna today. She took it like she takes everything. Jaw set, eyes forward, refusing to show pain. So like her father that way. I finally showed her the letters. All these years I thought I was protecting her. Now I wonder if I just couldn't bear to share her, even with the memory of him. My last act of selfishness, perhaps. But there's still time to make it right. She deserves to know him, and he deserves to know the remarkable woman his daughter has become." The final entry was dated just 1 week earlier. October 5th. Pain worse today, medication less effective, but clarity comes with suffering sometimes. I've spent 23 years caught between anger and love, unable to fully embrace either. What a waste of precious life. Called Thomas today. Told him everything about the cancer, about Ayanna finding Shadow, about my wish for them to meet before I'm gone. He wept. After all these years, he still sounds the same when he cries. Some things time cannot change. I hope they find each other. I hope they recognize themselves in each other. I hope they forgive me for the years I kept them apart. Ayanna closed the journal gently, tears streaming freely now. "Why didn't you tell me that you were in contact with him again?" Wanted you to find your own way to him, Sarah whispered, without my history coloring it, without my pain becoming yours. But I had a right to know. Yes. Sarah's admission cut through Ayanna's rising anger. You did. I was wrong. So many years, wasted on pride and hurt. Her breathing became more labored, each word an effort. Don't make my mistake. Life is too short for unfinished hearts. A nurse entered the room, checking monitors with practiced efficiency. She frowned slightly at the readings, then addressed Ayanna. The doctor will be in shortly. Your mother needs rest now. Ayanna nodded, still holding Sarah's hand. I'll be right outside, Mom, just for a few minutes. Shadow, Sarah murmured. Let him stay. The nurse began to object, but something in Sarah's expression stopped her. Just the dog, then, she conceded, and only for a few minutes. In the hallway, Ayanna leaned against the wall, the journal clutched to her chest. 23 years of her mother's private thoughts and feelings. The unfiltered truth of a love that never truly died, despite betrayal and absence. The revelation that Thomas had reached out when he learned of her deployment. That her mother had kept so many secrets in the name of protection. It was overwhelming. She was so lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice Joseph approaching until he was standing directly in front of her. He's worthless. How is she? He asked, his tone carefully modulated to suggest concern. Ayanna straightened, instantly wary. What are you doing here? Paying respects to an old acquaintance. Joseph's smile didn't reach his eyes. Sarah and I knew each other, briefly, before you were born. She never mentioned you. No, I don't imagine she would have. Joseph glanced toward the closed door of Sarah's room. Our last conversation wasn't pleasant. Ayanna studied him, seeing echoes of Thomas in his features, but none of the warmth. What do you want, Joseph? You didn't come all this way for a social visit. Direct, like your father. Joseph reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. The offer I mentioned yesterday. I thought perhaps, given your mother's condition, you might be more receptive now. Ayanna stared at the envelope, anger rising like bile in her throat. You're trying to bribe me while my mother is dying? Joseph's expression hardened. I'm offering you financial security during a difficult time. The council meets in 3 hours. Thomas is distracted, vulnerable. The moment to act is now. To betray him, you mean. To secure your future. Joseph held out the envelope. Medical bills aren't cheap, Sergeant Rainwater, and hospice care even less so. Something about his tone, the cold calculation behind the false sympathy, broke Ayanna's tenuous control. Get out, she said, her voice dangerously soft. Get out before I forget we're in a hospital. Joseph didn't move, his arms still extended with the envelope. Think of your mother, what she needs now. My mother needs peace, dignity, family. Ayanna stepped closer, her military bearing intimidating despite their height difference. None of which you understand. Before Joseph could respond, the door to Sarah's room opened and the nurse emerged with urgent purpose. Miss Rainwater, your mother's asking for you. The doctor thinks you should come now. Again brushed past Joseph without another word, rushing back to her mother's side. She didn't see him slide the envelope under the strap of her bag, which hung forgotten on a nearby chair. Nor did she see his satisfied expression as he turned and walked unhurriedly toward the elevator, his phone already at his ear as he delivered news to waiting allies back on the reservation. Inside the room, the atmosphere had changed. Sarah's breathing was shallow, her skin waxy pale. Shadow lay with his head on the bed beside her hand, whining softly. The doctor stood checking monitors, his expression confirming what Ayanna already knew. Mom? She whispered, taking Sarah's free hand. I'm here. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, seeking her daughter's face. "Thomas?" she managed. "I've called him. The helicopter is on its way." Ayanna squeezed her hand. "Just hold on a little longer." But they both knew there wasn't time. Sarah's gaze shifted to Shadow, then back to Ayanna. "Promise me," she whispered. "Anything?" "Find peace. With him. For your sake, not his." "I promise," Ayanna said, tears falling freely now. "I'll try. I will." Sarah seemed to gather her remaining strength. "Tell him." "I forgive him. And I'm sorry, too." Her eyes closed briefly, then opened once more with startling clarity. "I loved you both so much. More than pride, more than pain." "No, Mung, I know." Iona bent to kiss her forehead. "Shadow," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible, "take care of them both." The German shepherd raised his head, ears pricked forward as if receiving a sacred command. He whined once, softly, a sound of acceptance and promise. Sarah smiled faintly, her hand relaxing in Ayanna's grip. Then, with one final, gentle exhale, she was gone, leaving Ayanna alone with the sacred burden of unfinished reconciliation and the weight of promises made at the threshold between worlds. The helicopter touched down on the hospital's landing pad just 20 minutes too late. Thomas burst through the doors of the oncology wing, his long silver braids flying behind him, only to find Ayanna sitting alone in the hallway outside Sarah's room. One look at her face told him everything. He stopped abruptly, the momentum of his rush forward collapsing into stillness. "I'm sorry," Ayanna said simply, her voice hoarse from grief. She couldn't wait any longer. Thomas sank slowly onto the bench beside her, the space between them measured in both inches and decades. For several minutes neither spoke. Shadow lay at Ayanna's feet, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes moving between the two humans as if trying to bridge their separate sorrows. "She left something for you," Ayanna finally said, reaching into her mother's satchel. She withdrew a sealed envelope with Thomas's name written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting. "She wanted you to have this." Thomas took the envelope with trembling hands but didn't open it. "What'd she say? At the end?" Ayanna swallowed hard. "She said to tell you she forgives you, and that she was sorry, too." She looked down at her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "She made me promise to try to find peace with you." "And William?" Thomas asked quietly, his voice stripped of everything but raw vulnerability. "I don't know," Ayanna admitted. "But I promised her I'd try." She rose abruptly. "The doctor needs you to sign some papers. As her—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "As her what?" Thomas asked. "She listed you as next of kin," Ayanna said. "Apparently she updated her paperwork recently." "You and me both." Thomas nodded, his composure threatening to break. He stood squaring his shoulders with visible effort. "What about arrangements? Did she tell you what she wanted?" "She wanted to be cremated." Ayanna's voice caught slightly. "And her ashes scattered in 2 places. Half on the mountain where you met, half on the reservation where—" She trailed off. "Where our daughter was conceived," Thomas finished softly. "Where our story should have continued." They walked together to complete the necessary formalities, the silence between them no longer hostile but filled with shared grief. As they signed the final documents releasing Sarah's body to the funeral home, Thomas's phone began ringing insistently. He ignored it until the nurse had left them alone again. "You should answer that," Ayanna said. "It's probably important." Thomas checked the screen. "It's Ben Running Wolf. The council meeting must be over." He hesitated, then answered, stepping slightly away for privacy. Ayanna watched his expression change as he listened, shock, then anger, then a resigned weariness that seemed to age him further. When he hung up, he stood motionless for a long moment, his back to her. "Joseph convinced the council, didn't he?" she asked. Thomas turned, surprise briefly replacing grief on his features. "How did you know?" "He was here earlier." Ayana's jaw tightened. "Offering me money to leave the reservation, said the vote was happening today, that you were vulnerable. He came to you while your mother was dying?" Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet. "Tried to bribe you?" "It doesn't matter now." Ayana picked up her bag, then noticed something fall from the strap, an envelope she hadn't put there. She bent to retrieve it, immediately recognizing Joseph's handiwork. "Looks like he left his offer anyway." Thomas watched as she opened the envelope and examined its contents. Her expression hardened as she rifled through what appeared to be several thick stacks of cash. $20,000, she said flatly, to disappear with Shadow and never return to tribal land. She held the envelope out to Thomas. "Apparently that's what your brother thinks my silence is worth." Thomas didn't take it. "What will you do?" Ayana considered the envelope for a long moment, then crossed to a nearby trash can and dropped it in. "I made my mother a promise. Running away would break it before I've even tried to keep it." Thomas's phone rang again. This time when he answered, his responses were terse, authoritative. When he hung up, he looked grimmer than before. "Joseph has called an emergency council session for this evening. They are voting on the final approval for the casino development." He ran a hand over his face. "They've timed it to coincide with Sarah's death, knowing I won't be there." "But you have to be there," Ayana said. "You're the chief." "My place is here, with you, with Sarah." Ayana studied him, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "Mom wouldn't want you to lose everything you've worked for. Not for a vigil she won't know about." Before Thomas could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. "She's right, Thomas." They turned to find Helen Many Horses approaching slowly down the corridor, her ancient body supported by a gnarled walking stick. Ben Running Wolf accompanied her, concern evident in his expression. "Helen," Thomas said, surprise momentarily displacing his grief, "you shouldn't have made this journey." "An elder goes where she is needed," Helen replied simply. Her dark eyes, sharp despite her advanced age, moved to Ayana. "I have come to sit with Sarah's daughter while you defend what must be defended." "Can't leave 'em," Thomas protested. "Not now." "Sarah Rainwater was a woman of great courage," Helen said. "She would not want you to surrender what you believe in, even in death." She moved closer to Ayana, placing a weathered hand on the younger woman's arm. "And her daughter is strong enough to bear grief without you holding her hand. Isn't that right, child?" Ayana nodded, unexpected gratitude flowing through her for this woman who understood that duty and grief could coexist. "Go," she told Thomas. "Stop Joseph before he destroys what you've built." "What about Sarah's—" Thomas couldn't bring himself to say body. "I've brought the tribal healer," Helen said. "We will prepare her according to both her traditions and ours. She will not be alone." Thomas hesitated, then looked to Ayana for confirmation. She nodded again. "Go. Do what she would have wanted you to do." As Thomas and Ben departed for the helicopter, Helen settled herself beside Ayana on the waiting room bench. Shadow immediately shifted position to rest his head on the elder's foot, an unusual gesture of trust that brought a smile to the ancient woman's face. "He knows a kindred spirit," she observed, gently patting the dog's head, "just as I recognized yours the moment you stepped onto our land." "You knew who I was?" Ayana asked. "I knew Sarah when she and Thomas were together," Helen confirmed. "I saw how they looked at each other. When I saw your eyes, I knew immediately whose daughter stood before me." She studied Ayana thoughtfully. You have questions. Ask them while we wait." Ayana hesitated, then voiced the doubt that had plagued her since finding her mother's journal. If Thomas really loved my mother, how could he have chosen the tribe over her, over us? Helen was quiet for a long moment, her gnarled fingers rhythmically stroking Shadow's fur. "Thomas is a good man, but not always a brave one," she said finally. "His father, your grandfather, was a hard man who believed mixing blood would weaken the tribe. Joseph fed those fears, whispering poison about how the people would never accept a chief who married outside the traditional way. Say, he just gave in, let others decide his life. He made a choice he has regretted every day since," Helen said simply. "The burden of leadership is heavy. Sometimes we sacrifice what we want most for what we believe is right for many." She fixed Ayana with a penetrating gaze. "But that does not make the choice correct, only painful." "Joseph was there from the beginning," Ayana said slowly, pieces falling into place. "Undermining their relationship, pushing his own agenda." Helen nodded. "Joseph has always believed himself better suited to lead. When Thomas turned from tradition by loving your mother, Joseph saw opportunity." She sighed heavily. "And now he sees it again. The casino development. Yes. He believes modernization is the only path forward, that our ways must change or die." "And what do you believe?" Ayana asked. "I believe balance is possible, that we can honor who we are while becoming what we must be." Helen's wise eyes searched Ayana's face. "Your father has tried to build that balance with the training center, joining our traditional understanding of animals with service to the wider world." Before Ayana could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas's number. She answered immediately, putting it on speaker. "Yeah, the council meeting has been controlled urgency. The council meeting has been moved up. Joseph claims he has proof I've been embezzling tribal funds, using the training center as a personal slush fund." "That's ridiculous," Ayana protested. "You've been putting your own money into the center, not taking it out." "He has documentation, bank records, transfer statements, all forgeries, but convincing ones. Without the original records from my office safe, I can't disprove his claims quickly enough." Helen leaned toward the phone. "Thomas, this is Helen. Where are the true records kept?" "In the fire safe behind my desk. But there's no time for anyone to retrieve them before the council votes." Ayana exchanged a glance with Helen, a decision crystallizing between them. "How long before the vote?" she asked. 45 minutes. Joseph moved everything up when he heard I was returning." "That's enough time," Ayana said decisively. "The helicopter that brought Helen and Ben, is it still at the hospital?" "Yes, I'm coming back. With Shadow. We'll get the records." "Ayana, you don't have to do this," Thomas protested. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," she replied, her voice steady with newfound certainty. "My mother made her peace with you. Now it's time I made mine, by helping you fight for what you both believed in." As she ended the call, Ayana turned to Helen, who was already nodding in approval. "Go," the elder woman said. "I will stay with your mother. She would be proud of what you're about to do." Ayana gathered her things quickly, Shadow already alert at her side. As she turned to leave, Helen caught her hand. "Remember, child, this journey isn't just about saving the training center or stopping Joseph. It's about healing what has been broken for too long." Her ancient eyes held Ayana's firmly. "Sometimes we must face the past before we can claim our future." With that blessing ringing in her ears, Ayana raced toward the helicopter pad, Shadow matching her stride for stride. For the first time since arriving on reservation land, her purpose felt clear. She was no longer just a daughter seeking answers or a soldier reclaiming her dog. She was a Blackfeather fighting for her heritage, even as that heritage was still revealing itself to her. The helicopter descended through gathering storm clouds, the reservation spreading out below like a patchwork quilt of pine forest, meadows, and the scattered buildings of the tribal community. Ayanna could see vehicles converging on the council building, Joseph's emergency session drawing a crowd just as he had intended. Tension coiled in her stomach as she directed the pilot to land behind the training center, away from curious eyes. 20 minutes until the vote, the pilot informed her as they touched down. Now keep the rotors hot. Ayanna nodded her thanks and jumped down with Shadow at her heel. They sprinted across the muddy yard, past the kennels where dogs barked in recognition of their passing. The main building stood dark and empty, the staff presumably at the council meeting. Ayanna tried the door. Locked. Without hesitation, she moved to a side window, using her elbow to break the glass before reaching in to unlock it from inside. "Sorry about that," she murmured to the absent Thomas as she climbed through. Shadow followed with athletic grace, landing silently beside her in Thomas' office. The fire safe stood where Thomas had described, a heavy, old-fashioned metal box bolted to the wall behind his desk. Ayanna knelt before it, staring at the combination lock with sudden realization. Thomas hadn't given her the code. She pulled out her phone to call him, then hesitated. The council meeting would have started by now. Any interruption might play into Joseph's hands. "Think," she whispered to herself. "What would he use?" She tried her birth date first, no luck, then Sarah's birthday, still nothing. Shadow whined softly, sensing her frustration. Then it hit her. The date on her mother's first journal entry, the day Thomas and Sarah met during the blizzard rescue. She dialed the numbers carefully. October 15th, 1. The safe clicked open. Inside lay meticulous financial records, each folder neatly labeled with dates spanning 20 years. Ayanna grabbed them all, stuffing them into her backpack. As she worked, her eyes caught on something else. A small wooden box, intricately carved with Blackfoot symbols. Something made her take this, too, tucking it carefully among the files. Shadow's sudden, alert posture stopped her cold. The dog's ears pricked forward, body tensing. Ayanna froze, listening. Footsteps approached from the outer hallway, too heavy to be staff. Shadow growled low in his throat. "She must have come here," a man's voice, one of Joseph's supporters from the council meeting. "Check the office while I secure the exits." Ayanna glanced frantically around the room. No time to leave the way she'd entered. Her military training kicked in. Assess, adapt, overcome. She motioned Shadow to silence, then slid beneath Thomas's massive oak desk, pulling the dog in beside her. The office door opened. Boots crossed the threshold, moving deliberately toward the now open safe. "Chief's daughter's been here all right," the man called out. "Safe's open, empty too." The Boots moved closer to the desk. Shadow tensed beside her, ready to protect. Ayanna laid a restraining hand on his neck, silently commanding him to stay. They couldn't afford a confrontation now, not with the records and so much at stake. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Thomas calling. She quickly silenced it, but not before the man heard. "Under the desk," he shouted, dropping to his knees to look. Powerful Borlak, Ayanna was faster. She exploded from her hiding place, using the backpack to sweep the man's legs as she bolted for the door. Shadow followed, a dark blur beside her. They raced down the hallway, hearing shouts behind them. "Back door!" she commanded Shadow, veering away from their entry point where she knew the second man waited. They burst through the rear exit into pouring rain, the storm having broken while they were inside. 2 figures stood between them and the helicopter, Joseph himself and another tribal officer. Joseph's face contorted with anger when he saw the backpack. "Give me the records, Sergeant," he demanded, moving to block her path. "This doesn't concern you." It concerns my father, Ayanna fired back. And my heritage. Joseph's laugh was cold. Your heritage? A few drops of Blackfoot blood doesn't make you one of us. You're nothing but Thomas's mistake, living proof of his weakness. The words struck deeper than Ayanna expected, touching insecurities she'd carried her entire life. But then she remembered her mother's journal, her strength, her unwavering love despite everything. She remembered Thomas's face when he looked at her. Recognition, regret, pride. You're wrong, she said simply. I'm his strength, and I'm done letting you use the past to poison the future. She signaled Shadow with a quick hand gesture. The dog immediately circled wide, creating a diversion that drew the attention of Joseph's companion. Ayanna used the moment to charge forward, ducking Joseph's grasp and sprinting toward the helicopter. "Stop there!" Joseph shouted over the intensifying storm. Ayanna reached the helicopter, tossing the backpack in before turning to call Shadow. The dog raced toward her, powerful strides eating up the distance. Behind him, Joseph's companion had pulled a weapon, not aiming to shoot, but to threaten. "Shadow now," Ayanna commanded. The German shepherd leapt into the helicopter as Joseph himself made a final desperate lunge for Ayanna. His fingers caught her jacket, pulling her off balance. For one terrible moment, she teetered on the edge of the helicopter's skid, the rotors whipping rain into a frenzy above them. "Give me the records," Joseph demanded, his face inches from hers. "Let go of my daughter," came a commanding voice, cutting through the storm's howl. Thomas stood 10 feet away, his silver hair plastered to his head by the rain, his stance wide and unyielding. Ben Running Wolf and 2 other tribal members flanked him, their expressions grim. "This is tribal business, Thomas," Joseph shouted over the helicopter's roar. "She's stolen confidential records." "No, brother," Thomas replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "She's recovered evidence of your deceit. The pilot radioed ahead. The council knows you sent men to intercept her." Joseph's grip on Ayanna's jacket faltered. She seized the moment to break free, swinging fully into the helicopter. "The meeting is postponed," Thomas continued, moving closer, "until all evidence can be properly reviewed. The council elders are waiting. It's time to face them, Joseph." For a moment, it seemed Joseph might resist, might choose violence over accountability. Then his shoulders sagged, the fight visibly draining from him. "You'll destroy everything we've built," he said to Thomas, his voice suddenly tired. "The old ways are dying. Can't you see that?" "Not dying," Thomas corrected. "Evolving. There's a difference." As Joseph was led away by the tribal officers, Thomas approached the helicopter where Ayanna waited, the precious records secure beside her. Shadow sat alertly at her feet, his mission completed. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, rain streaming down his weathered face. Ayanna nodded. "I got what you needed." She hesitated, then added, "The combination, it was the date you met Mom." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, pain and tenderness intermingling. "I never changed it. Not in 24 years. This simple admission spoke volumes about what he had carried all this time, what he had lost and continued to mourn despite his choices. "I found something else," Ayanna said, reaching into the backpack. She withdrew the carved wooden box. "What is this?" Thomas took it reverently, his hands cradling the box as if it contained something infinitely precious. "It belonged to your grandmother, my mother. She was the tribe's last traditional animal healer before me." He opened it carefully, revealing a delicate necklace, a single carved wolf suspended on a leather cord, surrounded by small turquoise beads. She wore this every day of her life, said it connected her to the spirit of every creature she helped. He held it out to Ayanna. "It should have been yours long ago." Ayanna stared at the offered heirloom, its significance washing over her. This wasn't just jewelry. It was heritage, connection, belonging. With slightly trembling hands, she accepted it. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions surging through her. Tame nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We should go. The council is waiting." The tribal council chamber hummed with tension when they arrived. Joseph sat stoically at one end of the long table, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. The elders, including Helen Many Horses, who had returned from the hospital, occupied their traditional seats. Community members packed the observers section, whispers ceasing when Thomas and Ayanna entered, Shadow moving protectively between them. Thomas took his place at the head of the table, his bearing dignified despite his rain-soaked appearance. Ayanna stood slightly apart, conscious of her liminal status. Not quite an outsider, not yet fully accepted. "The records," Thomas said simply, gesturing to the backpack Ayanna still carried. She brought it forward, placing it on the table before stepping back. Ben Runningwolf began distributing the folders to council members, who examined the contents with increasing disbelief. "These show conclusively that Chief Blackfeather has been supporting the training center with his personal funds," Ben announced to the gathered crowd. "Furthermore, we've found evidence that the documents Joseph Blackfeather presented earlier were falsified." Joseph remained silent, his gaze fixed on some middle distance. "Is this true?" Helen asked him directly, her ancient voice carrying surprising strength. For a long moment, Joseph nodded once, a barely perceptible acknowledgment of defeat. "Why?" Thomas asked, genuine bewilderment in his tone. "We're brothers, Joseph. We want the same thing, prosperity for our people." "No," Joseph responded, finally meeting Thomas's gaze. "We don't. You want to preserve traditions that the modern world has no use for. I want progress, development, opportunity. No more poverty. No more watching our young people leave because there's nothing for them here." "And you believe destroying who we are will save us?" Thomas challenged. "I believe adapting will save us," Joseph countered. "The training center bleeds money. The casino would bring jobs, tourism, revenue." "At what cost?" Helen interjected. "Our sovereignty? Our connection to the land?" The debate might have continued along familiar entrenched lines, but Ayanna surprised everyone by stepping forward, Shadow at her side. "May I speak?" she asked formally. Helen nodded permission, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the chamber. "I am not Blackfoot by upbringing," Ayanna began, her voice steady. "I didn't grow up with your traditions or learn your stories, but these past few days have taught me something about who I am, about the blood that runs in my veins." She touched the wolf necklace now hanging around her neck. "My mother died today. She spent her final moments making peace with the past, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary." She glanced at Thomas, whose eyes shone with quiet pride, then back to the council. "It seems to me you're all arguing about two paths forward, tradition or progress, as if they must be separate. But what if they're not?" Her military training gave her words authority beyond her years. "The training center doesn't have to be just about preserving the past. It could be a bridge to the future." "Oh?" one of the younger council members asked. "Service dogs for veterans with PTSD, Ayanna explained. "There's federal funding available, programs through the VA. I've seen firsthand how animals like Shadow can heal wounds. Medications can't touch." She rested her hand on the dog's head. "The Blackfoot have understood the connection between humans and animals for generations. That knowledge isn't obsolete. It's more valuable than ever." A thoughtful silence followed her words. "The girl speaks wisdom," Helen said finally. "Perhaps there is a third path, one that honors who we have been while becoming who we need to be." The debate continued for hours, passionate but increasingly productive. By evening's end, a compromise had begun to take shape. A scaled-back casino development on a portion of tribal land, with proceeds partially funding an expanded training center focused on therapy and service animals for veterans. Joseph, seeing the tide turn, reluctantly acknowledged defeat. He would face consequences for his deception, but his core concern, economic development for the tribe, had been heard and incorporated. As the council finally adjourned near midnight, Thomas found Ayanna waiting outside, gazing up at stars now visible through breaks in the clearing storm clouds. Shadow sat beside her, his loyal presence a constant in her shifting world. "You were extraordinary in there," Thomas said, joining her. "Your mother would have been proud." "She always told me I had my father's gift for bringing people together," Ayanna replied softly. "I never understood what she meant until today." Thomas was silent for a moment, absorbing the impact of her words. "I have no right to ask this," he finally said, "but I hope you'll stay, at least for a while. The training center could use your expertise. And he hesitated, vulnerability evident in his weathered face. "I would like the chance to know my daughter." Ayanna looked at him, this man who was both stranger and blood, who had failed her mother but was trying, however imperfectly, to make amends. She thought of Sarah's final request, of the promise she'd made. "I can't promise forever," she said honestly, "but I can promise to try. For her sake, and maybe, eventually, for ours." The shadow pressed against her leg as if lending his strength to her decision. Above them the clouds parted fully, revealing a sky brilliant with stars, the same stars that had witnessed Thomas and Sarah's love, Ayanna's birth, years of separation, and now perhaps the beginning of healing. Thomas nodded, acceptance and hope mingling in his expression. "That's all any of us can do. Try. One day at a time." Together, father, daughter, and the faithful dog who had brought them together, they walked toward home, three silhouettes against the vast Montana night, carrying the weight of the past, but finally facing forward, toward whatever tomorrow might bring. For those of us who've lived past our 50th year, we understand that time doesn't heal all wounds. It merely teaches us which ones we can bear to live with. The story of Thomas and Ayanna reminds us that it's never too late to reach across the chasms we've created in our families. Many of us carry regrets like stones in our pockets. The child we didn't support, the parent we didn't reconcile with, the words left unspoken until it was too late. We tell ourselves there's always tomorrow, until suddenly there isn't. Sarah's journal entries echo our own unwritten thoughts, the private aches we hide from the world, the memories we protect even as they wound us. Perhaps the most powerful gift we can give ourselves in our later years isn't financial security or physical comfort, but the courage to heal while still can be healed, to reach out while there's still time, to say I was wrong or I forgive you before the opportunity slips away forever. Our mistakes don't have to be our final legacy. Like Shadow finding his way back to Ayanna, we too can find our way back to what matters most, if we're brave enough to try. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.